Is it okay for the church to get involved in the public arena? Should Christians be actively involved in the free elections of the United States of America? Faith Wins is an organization dedicated to engaging pastors, congregations, and Christians in the public arena. Why, you may ask? Because the influence of Christians needs to be felt around this country. Jesus is the solution, and we need to bring biblical solutions to the marketplace of ideas before it's too late, and we need to do it now. There are over 80 million eligible Christian voters in this country, but only 30 million regularly participate in the elections. This needs to change, and Chad Connelly is going to tell you why in just a minute. Check us out online at faithwins.us. That's faithwins.us. When we sit on the sidelines and hope for a better future, the enemy wins. When we mobilize, register, and make our voices heard, faith wins every time. Hey, thanks for tuning in today to the Faith Wins podcast with Faith Wins founder Chad Connelly. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg. Chad, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jim, what's up, brother? How you doing, man?
It's good to be back on with you, and we're excited to hear about the updates with Faith Wins. Why don't you tell us, just remind everybody, because it's been a while since we've done a podcast, what is Faith Wins all about?
We are trying our very best to maximize Christian vote at every level and make sure 100% of people in your church are registered and that they're voting biblical values. That's it. We maximize Christian vote in every election up and down the ballot, not just about president or senate or governor, city council, school board, making sure Christian votes and voices are heard and felt, Jim.
Yeah, there's 500,000 plus elected offices in this country, isn't there, Chad?
Yeah, that's right. And regrettably, way too many times Christians aren't very present, Jim. And we're looking at things happening in the culture that we can only say are our fault for letting them happen. And these discussions, people are frustrated. They see the result of us escaping the field. We've really kind of ceded the field to people that hate God, I'm afraid.
So you travel a lot with Faith Wins. Who do you meet with when you travel?
You know, my goal is to meet with pastors who need to hear this message. I've already been to 9 states this year so far. We've done pastor meetings in all 9. Sometimes we're meeting with 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. I've had bigger meetings, as many as several hundred, where we do church meetings and have my buddy David Barton talk about American Christian history to give them the why we should be involved. And then I show them the how to engage these cultural issues.
So last year, in the last 12 months, how many pastor meetings did you hold in how many states?
Well, last year alone, we did 132 what we call signature meetings in 24 states. Now, that doesn't include the I would say hundreds of smaller pastor meetings. So my methodology is this. I connect with pastors in the state who I know love the Lord and they love our nation. And they realize God don't need me or you or America. He's going to do his purposes, but he does have an expectation of us to be salt and light. And so I find those pastors, every meeting we go to, we locate because they emerge. They come out like one yesterday here in your home state of Florida, Jim, who came up and said, I need to be involved in what you're doing. I can tell you stories about pastors from any state you want who just emerge. And I say, well, you know 5 or 10 pastors that I've never met. Why don't you invite them back and we'll have a David Barton or a Congressman Bob McEwen connect those dots between American Christian history and God's role in our nation and what they need to be doing right now. So last year, Jim, we did 132 pastor meetings in 24 states. We had 27,000 people in those meetings. 4,411 were pastors. We had 24 different denominations host us. And in the last 2 cycles, our little team has registered a little under 2 million new Christian voters.
That's fantastic. It's fantastic. So let's just say somebody's listening today and they want to arrange one of those pastor meetings. They've got connections to the pastoral community in their town. How do they get connected to Faith Wins so that they can do that?
If they go to faithwins.org, faithwins, faithwins.org, and it has a place there to connect, put in your information, get our newsletters, get our updates, get these podcasts, and we push them out that way. One thing we do very differently, we don't buy lists. I don't care about buying a list. I don't want anybody's list. I have people give me lists all the time. The 17,000 pastors that are in my phone, that I have cell phones and emails for, I either met them in person, they were on a Zoom meeting, they connected us through our website. It was an active, not a passive way of connecting because like I said, I don't want 11 kabillion on my list. I want the committed men of God who want to be involved in the culture and want to make a difference.
That's fantastic. All right, so what is the key? What's the key to raising up voters who not only vote their values, but vote and they live out their faith too?
I think it's just as simple as meeting them, letting them hear our message. I believe we got a great story to tell. I believe God let me serve in politics at the highest levels, seeing what actually works, and what works is voter registration. And some 80 couple million people sitting in churches, and you and I know there are all sorts of different flavors for that, but 82 million sitting in churches, the high watermark, Jim, is 31 million self-identified evangelicals voting. So under everybody's definition.
Hang on. Wait. 80 million? 80 million versus 30 million. So 50 million are sitting on the sidelines not even voting?
And the different pollsters, Pew, Gallup, Barna, they all have different definitions for Christian or, notional or church going. So I take the church going. And we understand there are different, denominations and flavors. But there are 80 couple million church going people sitting in church on a typical Sunday. High watermark is 31 million. So under everybody's definition, somewhere, and this is generous, somewhere between 40 and 50 million people who proclaim the name of Christ don't vote.
Wow. Well, when we come back, I want to dig into that a little deeper and understand why. Why aren't these people voting? I mean, we need to dig into that, but we got to take a break. But we'll come back and talk about that. We're talking with Chad Connelly today from Faith Wins. Check him out online, faithwins.org, faithwins.org. We'd love for you to get involved. We'd love for you to organize a whole bunch of pastor meetings there in your community. Check us out, faithwins.org. We'll be right back.
Go to faithwins.org.
What would happen if just 4 to 5% of those 30 to 40 million non-voting Christians got off the sidelines, registered to vote, and showed up at the polls? The church will have a voice.
My name is Chad Connelly. When I founded Faith Wins, it was to spread the truth that God's role in America is irreplaceable. Faith wins when people of faith vote their values.
Hey, welcome back to the Faith Wins podcast with Chad Connelly. Chad, let's just step back again. I know you're super excited about all the stuff that's going on, but that statistic, I'm still getting over almost wanting to puke when you said that 50 million Christ followers are on the sidelines at every voter and every election. That's just crazy. But we're going to have to talk about that in more detail. But what makes Faith Wins different from other voter registration organizations? Because there's a lot of them out there.
Well, there are a lot of groups they're doing stuff, and I think everything matters. We don't know of a group that's laser beam focused on church voter registration other than us. The parties do it. If you go downtown in a big city, there are a multitude of organizations that are constantly registering people. The left is very good at going to nursing homes and apartment complexes. On the right, our folks tend to go to Tractor Supply and Lowe's and Home Depot and stand outside. I have an interesting stat that a guy named Reince Priebus, who was former chairman of the Republican National Committee, and as you know, he was President Trump's first chief of staff. He gave me a stat several years ago, and I don't know if it's probably pretty close, that the RNC spends about $55 per new voter registration. Well, we go directly at churches looking for unregistered. And of course, we don't run in there with an elephant hat on and a t-shirt. We don't let party types and consultant hacks go into a church. We teach the church how to do it. And we tell them, find the person, the guy, the gal, and every pastor knows this person, Jim, who's throwing stuff at the TV. They're so mad. Here's what you can do. Here's how you channel that frustration with what's going on. Get them a table, stand them in the back of the church, and let them do voter registration. So I think what sets us apart is we are laser beam focused on church voter registration and maximizing Christian vote. And I do think, I've been a state party chairman. I've run races, dozens and dozens and dozens. I know what works strategically. And let's face it, a lot of ministry groups get mission drift. They'll find a donor that I like this, and they'll run off in that direction. And look, we do a lot of different things through our organization. I just finished a Zoom call a little bit ago with a bunch of Ohio pastors. There's an abortion referendum. But you know what we talked about? Hey, talk about this, give them voter guides, do voter registration. Don't assume that everybody in your church is registered to vote, because you're going to be sadly mistaken. I cannot tell you how many pastors have come up to me and said, hey, my people are registered. And I'll say, well, I double dog dare you to try this. I had a church in Asheville, North Carolina. The guy said, I talk about it all the time. And 1,500 people, voting age adults, go to his church. 41% were not registered, and only a little less than half were voting in a regular election. I bumped his list for him. I bumped it up and merged it into a voter file. I said, I don't want your list. I won't take your list, but I'm going to compare it to a voter file, and let's just see. He was stunned, Jim. He was blown away. And we can do that for anybody, but I just double dog dare them, to use the Christmas story analogy. Stick your tongue on that frozen pole and let's find out, buddy.
I double dog dare you. Yeah, I actually have that on top of all my pocket testaments of John. I double dog dare you. All right, so I double dog dare you to read this. All right, so do you just hang out with one large denomination, or is there, which ones do you hang out with?
Man, that's such a great question. So when I ran
the large denominations have all the money. I figured that's where you were going.
No, look, I want to go to the Bible preaching denominations. I want to go to the ones who aren't apologizing, saying, well, the Bible's really good, but it's not everything. I want to go to the ones that believe from Genesis to maps, it's the Word of God. It's the infallible, inerrant Word of God. And so I want to talk to the biblical Christians. So from 17 to 20, I had 9 different denominations host our David Barton, what we call signature meetings. Last year in 2022, I had 24 different denominations host us. It was a major goal of mine. And look, you and I both know there are groups and churches and denominations, they just don't play well in the sandbox with others. So this has become my line. I'm not going to argue with you about how you do things or doctrine. I'm a Christian first. I'm a conservative, happen to be a Republican. I go to a Baptist church, but I believe the Bible's the inerrant, infallible Word of God. And if we don't link arms over things like religious liberty, we are going to lose our freedoms. We're going to lose our nation. I believe this next election will determine whether or not we go the line of socialism. We're teetering. In fact, we're over the edge. We're falling like a hard rock now. There are literally adults in places of legislative bodies, place of authority, who are having conversations about, well, if a boy feels like a girl, he should be able to go shower with the girls. And we have major companies that are not only edifying, but they're elevating this kind of thinking. Here's swimsuits for trans. What? Are you kidding me? We thought it was about killing all the innocent babies, and it's horrible. But it's gone so much further. When you don't have a standard, when absolute truth doesn't mean absolute truth, when relativism takes it to the next logical step, there are no boundaries, Jim. And this is the church's fault. We should have screamed and hollered and ranted and raved in 73 over abortion. We didn't. We fought that fight now for 40 years. We finally won it. The Dobbs decision sent it back to the states. Now this whole sexual liberty thing is a direct and existential threat to the idea of religious liberty. I'm reading a book right now that's about, and it goes back to the art of the ball, the homosexual movement, that they wanted, and the quote of the authors was, they wanted to force a debate and a clash between sexual freedom and religious freedom. And if there are judges that aren't anchored to truth, Jim, and they're not anchored to the Word of God and the U.S. Constitution, they're going to give sexual freedom the rights over religious freedom. And our founders didn't found America or come here for sexual freedom. They came here for religious freedom. So if we don't get Christians to understand that, and those 30, 40, 50 million non-voting ones to declare that right is right and wrong is wrong, we're losing our nation.
Got lots more Chad Connelly coming up here on the Faith Wins podcast. Stay tuned. Please get involved. Check us out online, faithwins.org. We'll be right back.
Go to faithwins.org.
People of faith, do not underestimate your influence.
You can influence policy decisions and elect public servants with a grounded biblical view who will stand for religious freedom.
Support traditional marriage and the family.
Defend and support Israel.
A voice for the unborn.
People who will defend our republic and secure our elections.
If believers won't step up to the plate and get involved, who will?
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 You know, it's really not about politics or party or politicians or personality. It's about policies and principles that most closely align with our biblical worldview, from the courthouse to the state house to the White House and beyond.
Welcome back to the Faith Wins podcast with Chad Connelly. Chad, all right, what do your meetings look like? When you gather together pastors, what do they look like? What's going on there?
Well, we do them. We do a lot of coffees, breakfasts, lunches. We avoid dinners. If we do an evening service, it's usually a church service. You know, we've had 1,000 people on a Monday night in spit and snow and ice in Iowa and New Hampshire. Last 2 weeks ago, I was in Maine. We had 55 people, and in New Hampshire the same day, we had about 30 at a breakfast. The church cooked us a feast. What I try to do is take the burden from a pastor and say, look, our donors want to fund a breakfast, a coffee, a lunch. They want to feed you and let you come and hear this message. So we typically buy an awful lot of Chick-fil-A sandwiches or jelly meals. My kids are frustrated. I got more Chick-fil-A points on my app than they do. And and I've never used it, but my team said, you ought to be getting the Chick-fil-A points. And you know my story. I spoke at Chick-fil-A the week before my wife died. And so we like honoring them. They've been really good to us. And so all over the country, we buy some sort of meal. It's a Chick-fil-A breakfast or a Panera Bread or a Jimmy John's lunch or a pizza lunch. And we put them together in fellowship. And we talk to them for about an hour and 15 minutes total. That's if David Barton or Bob McEwen are with me and they're teaching the American Christian history part. And then I come in, I kind of frame it. I tee it up on the front side and I finish it up on the back side and just tell them, here's what we need to do next. And I give them action items. And we want to help them immediately understand the importance of voter registration. So we're going to tell them, hey, around July 4th, do a voter registration drive. But our real point, Jim, is we want to do 2 back-to-back in September. That's usually in that time frame right before registration closes. I know some states are insane and they let you register up to the last day, and no wonder there's question marks. But we want to do them back-to-back in September. Families are done with their vacations and travel. Typically, it's after Labor Day. People begin to focus. And back-to-back 2 Sundays gives you a chance for the pastor to tell them how important it is, but also for them to reinforce the idea so it sinks in a little bit. You know, I think that what happens a lot of times is people don't think it's important. I just mentioned on the Ohio Zoom earlier today that George Barna, the Christian pollster, says one of the top reasons people vote is somebody they respect tells them this is a big deal. And so I think the secret sauce is not just doing voter registration, but it's that pastor leader that people already have a high regard for, telling them this is important, go make it a priority. And let's face it, people get busy, they don't pay attention. But statistics tell us that if you register to vote, if you and Martha register to vote this year, there's an 80% chance that you'll vote. And we know from history that if somebody registered 2 or more years ago, there's only a 52% chance you'll vote. So voter registration is not only a big deal for this year, it's a hook for other people who may forget the importance of voting. So we push voter registration. Our meetings look like a gathering, a fellowship. We let them chew and eat while we're talking. We want to be respectful of their time. And so typically I'll meet with the host pastor. Man, we got pastors all over the country that want to host this. And I'll say, Pastor, why don't you welcome us? If you want to have a song sung, and we do a lot of church services, frankly, in the evenings where they do church service and then give us the sermon time. But I'll have the pastor welcome everybody, say a prayer. He'll introduce me. I'll do our 1.5-minute Faith Wins video to kind of give them the overview. And then I'll talk to them, tell them my story, how God put me in this. And you know it. It's just, you can't make it up. It's one of those but God things. And say, hey, I think God's given me a chance to see politics at the highest level. And as a Christian first, to make sure that intersection hits so that we maximize Christian impact. I'm trying to do this in every state. Next week, in fact, after Memorial Day, I'm going to Oregon and Washington. And let me tell you how that came about, because this is the typical meeting. So there's a Christian guy who lost, I forget what he's running for, in Oregon by like 200 votes. And he tried to mobilize churches and didn't know how. Somebody gave him my cell phone. So weeks ago, this guy I'd never heard of, hadn't met, couldn't identify a lineup kind of thing, called me out of the blue, left a message, said, hey, I'm Michael, such and such. I heard about what y'all did in Virginia and other states. I love David Barton. I've been watching your videos. Would you come to Oregon? Well, okay, let's have a conversation. Put him on the phone with my scheduler. We started talking through it. We do have some pastors who've been on our Zoom calls from Oregon and Washington. Yes, there are Christians left there. They tell me that outside of Portland and Seattle, it's pretty much America. And so we're going to do 7 meetings on June, it'll be on our website, but there's 3 days. We're flying into Portland. We're driving around Oregon and Washington, and we're going to them. So the last thing I want to mention about what our meetings look like, I have watched in great ministries I've supported for years. They'll have a meeting in DC or Dallas or Colorado Springs. They'll say, hey, come here. Well, Jim, you and I know pastors don't have a lot of extra money.
And certainly not to go to DC.
No, it's expensive. So we're doing the Charles Finney model. Did you know that in Finney's lifetime with the Great Awakening, that guy rode horseback from Georgia to Maine 7 times? And David Barton says that historians say that 80% of Americans heard that guy preach. That's incredible. I figure I can hop on a plane and fly across America as many times as it needs be if we can stir Christians up and give them the freedom to hear the gospel, give them the freedom to hear the truth about American history, and maybe pierce their hearts about what they ought to be doing to get involved.
And we want you to get involved at faithwins.org, faithwins.org. Chad, before we finish up the podcast for today, when you get into these meetings and you finish these meetings, I imagine you walk away encouraged. What's the one common theme that encourages you at the end of each one of these meetings?
Watching the light bulbs come on, the eyebrows pop up, the light bulbs coming on. Yes, you're exactly right. And I can tell you more stories on the next podcast.
How do you want people to get involved with Faith Wins, Chad?
Go to faithwins.org, ping us, fill in your information, get on our email list. You'll get all the updates. You'll get all the meetings, where they're going to be. You'll get these podcasts. You'll get all my media hits, and you'll see exactly how you need to get your church involved to make a difference, not just this election, but every single election to take America back for God.
Thanks, Chad. And remember that when you register to vote and you vote according to biblical values, faith wins. Hey, thanks for listening to the Faith Wins podcast with Faith Wins founder, Chad Connelly. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and I want to ask you to check out Faith Wins online at faithwins.us. That's faithwins.us. Your vote is needed and necessary, and we all need to learn to engage in our system of free elections right here in the United States of America. If you're not registered to vote, please take time to do so on your local county voter registration website and do it today. In an upcoming election, vote for candidates supporting biblical values and a biblical worldview. Until next time, remember, when Christians engage in the public arena, faith wins.